this is the way my brain works, is I realized, I mean, my oldest is almost 3 now. I was already starting to rationalize too. Like, you'll start to rationalize that, like, I'm doing it for my kids. Like, I'm doing this for their financial success. But then I had a really eye-opening conversation with a good friend of mine's dad who's done extremely well, like extremely well. And what he said is like, no, like, I didn't give my, and his son is grateful for this now. So as I say this, like, I know both the dad and the son, is that although he had done extremely well, and of course the basics, like the house they're living in and like sporting equipment, of course they probably had good stuff. But when he was 18, his kid didn't get any money, meaning like he even made him save up to buy his first car and things like that. And it's like, you realize this rationalization of like, oh, I'm going to do this to make sure my family's taken care of. It's like, hey, unless you were to do something really dumb, that's going to be taken care of. Like, stop using that as a rationalization to think like more. Because what he said is like, yeah, like my kids is like, now where I will flex for my kids, and it's similar to what you said, is that when his kid was 31 and needed to buy a house, he paid for it in cash and said, you can pay me back at 0% interest. And then I think even eventually he was like, hey, don't pay me back. Because like his kid was 30 at that point, and it's like, you know, the difference between psychologically at 18 and 30, like if you're 30 and your kid's squared away and you do that, that just changed their life. Because now they can save $4,000, $3,000 a month on their mortgage, and they have a good head on their shoulders. You do that shit at 18, and you give me, when I'm 18, you give me $100,000 to spend, I'm going to be a little asshole. So like just little things like that, I realized working out that like, hey, like, no, don't convince yourself that when your kid's 18, they should have a brand new car and like 80,000 in their bank account. Like, that's actually extremely unhealthy. And that would be you taking and swinging the pendulum of how, I mean, I didn't have over $400 in my bank account until I was 24 years old. So like, I wouldn't trade that for the world, because it teaches you actually have to stand on your own 2 feet and figure shit out. Now, my parents were still supportive. So if they're listening, I don't want them to think that as if I had terrible parents. But it's like that pendulum, and there's books written about this. Like, don't let the pendulum swing so far now that when your kid's 17, they're the spoiled little brat with the fancy car and all the nicest clothes. It's like, because that they don't have an edge then. How do you have an edge? It's like the boxer who said, like, how do you wake up and go to boxing practice when you're waking up in silk sheets, which is just an incredible quote.
Yeah. You know, it's the good times create weak men phrase, you know, and I think the best way to set it up is like you gotta set them up to be resilient and resourceful. And then to your point, yes, once they get into late 20s, early 30s, if then you could unleash the financial support, it'd be like kind of like probably like a silly hunting analogy. It's like, imagine you have 100 freezers of meat that could keep forever, and it was like the best shit. And you just were going to give that food to your children when they got older, and like, okay, live off of this. Well, for a while that would be a very good thing, but like, you also need to teach them how to hunt.
Yep.
And ideally they never need it, but if they do need it, at least they still have the skills to procure their own food. You know what I mean? Like, kind of making a ridiculous analogy. Whereas if you just give them all the freezers of meat and say, okay, this is yours now, like, do good things. If they have not acquired any of the skills of their own for their own life, it's a one generation thing. And then, you know, then the next generation has to go through the cycle all over again and learn the hard way. So I think that a lot of people, that's very hard to thread the needle on that with kids. I would imagine, obviously we're very early in it. But it is important that you make them be scrappy. And yeah, you don't need to buy your 16-year-old kid a freaking G-Wagon and all these things that I think just sends completely the wrong message. Like, let's get something safe, but like, we're going to get a used car that maybe is a little bit of a beater. You know what I mean? Not a beater, but you know what I mean? You can't be like, oh, look at their white G-Wagon AMG with the blacked out wheels. And you know what I mean? That's a $200,000 car you're driving as a 16-year-old. Like, if you're doing that, like, you're screwed.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
You're in trouble.